What should you be doing as a board to prepare new trustees? Whether your school elects or appoints trustees to the board, what are the strategies that might help you accelerate the preparedness of trustees so that they can be more impactful once on the board? In this video, we look at succession planning strategies so that the health of the board as a whole can be considered, as well as the ways in which individual trustees are prepared for their work on the board. When you step back and think about your own motivation for joining the board, what was it that attracted you to join? Was it a desire to serve, or motivated by some aspects of the school that you thought perhaps could be done differently? As we've explored already in other videos, it's not uncommon for people to join the board with a special interest. Perhaps they feel that the standards of mathematics aren't what they would like to have, or feeling that maybe there should be more competitive sport in the school. For some, they may feel that their social or cultural groups are not effectively represented in the school, or indeed that there's some systems that are not fair somehow. Whatever these personal interests, they're generally not a firm foundation for a strong board. We've explored the role of the trustee and the duty of loyalty to the school to put aside personal agendas and work for the best interest of the school as a whole. The duty of care and fiduciary responsibilities means that trustees have to commit the time and energy to be thorough in their work in committees and the board, and to act with integrity to safeguard the school. And the strategic and generative aspects of governance require trustees to work collaboratively and with high degrees of flexibility to appropriately frame problems before trying to seek strategies to solve them. This mismatch between what people may think is required on the board and the desirable attributes is really the crux of the issue here. What can the board do to ensure that potential trustees can be identified, that the needs of the board are understood, so that incoming trustees have the opportunities to understand and adapt to the actual needs of the board? If the school already has a governance committee, the board's succession planning would be a core function of this work. Even if there's no formally constituted committee, a task force could be made up to first look at the strengths of the individuals on the board, the anticipated turnover, and the needs of the board when factoring any strategic plans or future challenges. This matrix helps the committee, and indeed the whole board, to see where the needs are and where the opportunities to increase or at least balance diversity on the board. Having described the characteristics and skills anticipated to strengthen the board, it would be an opportunity for all trustees to put their minds together to try to identify people that may match. Even if the board is composed only of elected positions, the board can still go through the process to identify and then reach out to encourage those people or that person to stand for election. Unless the potential trustee is known personally to one of the board members, the initial outreach would probably fall to the governance committee. The idea would be to sow some seeds of how the person may contribute to the success of the school, and would allow him or her to be part of a collegiate working group, and then encourage them to use their own networks to be nominated to stand for election. Perhaps there are opportunities to invite that person to join a committee or a task force, so that he or she can get a feel for the work of being on the board before actually putting themselves forward. Trustees should be encouraging dialogue to make personal bonds and provide opportunities that can give insight into the school, its history, and how fulfilling it is to serve on the board. The governance committee might also wish to advertise within the school community to actively promote people with certain skills or knowledge to put themselves forward for consideration. Again, perhaps offering the opportunity to be on a task force initially while waiting for the elections or a cycle of appointments to be made. Either way, at this stage of involvement, it would be good to have a job description that clearly outlines the roles and responsibilities of trustees, and an opportunity to explain why it's necessary. Once the person has been appointed or elected, then having a detailed governance handbook and induction program is important, and there's a separate video about that in the first section of this series. The other aspect of board succession planning is to identify and prepare for board leadership, typically identified as the chair position, but may also apply to committee chairs as well. Where boards suffer from high turnover, there can be an associated high rate of change of the board chair, which can lead to inconsistencies and inefficiencies. Schools with stronger board structures often have a planned transition for the chair, such that the vice chair, for example, works closely for a year or longer to ensure that he or she really understands the culture, the history, the background, and the anticipated issues long before taking over the reins. Building strength and depth on the board is a real challenge, and where the chair is simply through a vote on the night, there's a high chance that the incoming chair wouldn't appreciate these complexities and subtleties of a high-performing board. Just consider the importance of distinguishing between what board work involves and the functions of leadership within the school, or the need for careful self-evaluation. There are so many subtleties that are lost, and all of the efforts to build board capacity can evaporate very quickly. When there's a high turnover of the board, it's not uncommon to see a pattern. New trustees may join the board with special interest groups behind them or with a personal agenda, and this can result in the board overstepping their role and micromanaging. This also happens when there's a new head of school, especially if the previous head left under less than ideal circumstances, and where existing board members feel that they need to take more of a management stance rather than a governance role. Once a competent head and stable board begin to develop effective strategies that's built on trust and competency, then the board can adopt a strong and purposeful balance of its fiduciary, strategic and generative duties. However, if that's left unchecked and undeveloped, there's a danger that the board then can lapse into a false sense of security, where they no longer approach their work with the same diligence, and meetings become more of a rubber stamping exercise. Sooner or later then, there may be some crisis in the community or difficult parent questions, and everyone throws up the hand saying, "How could this happen?" Followed by intense scrutiny by the board, potential micromanagement, all over again, and so the cycle continues. So how can this be countered? What strategies could the governance committee consider to keep the board effective in their role, this Goldilocks zone of careful fiduciary, strategic and generative governance? First and foremost would be deliberate strategies, typically defined by the governance committee and with the chair, to engage in ongoing professional development for the board. But equally important are the approaches that define and reinforce board roles and effective practices that ensure rigor and reflection. What's your board currently doing to identify the needs of the board and to nurture potential future trustees? Is there anything else that you think needs to be done in this area?